Hello, dear viewers. Support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it. And also, make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video.
Harry studied the terrified expression of the vampire lord before him. For a fleeting moment he considered ending her life, but was ultimately hesitant to do so. Something held him back. This moment was pivotal for his plans, and killing the vampire could ruin everything. Voldemort likely had a clear understanding of this ancient vampire lord's power. If she were to die so so's to Hogwarts, Voldemort would inevitably grow suspicious. The Dark Lord might alter his carefully laid plans, delaying the very outcome Harry needed to control. But he couldn't let her leave, either. Once she reported what she had seen, it would create an entirely different set of complications. There's only one way to resolve this, and I must act quickly. Harry had finally decided on the best path to follow. He raised his staff, its tip glowing with power. The vampire lord recoiled, her fear intensifying. "Please, oh great lord," she begged, her voice trembling. "I did not mean to offend by trespassing into your lands." Despite her millennia of existence, the instinct to survive was overwhelming, so she did not hesitate to surrender while in front of an impossible obstacle. She was now completely convinced that this was him. This had to be the ancient wizard lord from back then. The coincidence was too great for it to be anyone else. Could there really be another wizard appearing in the same spot and wielding such magic? "What is your name?" Harry asked, his voice calm yet commanding. The vampire hesitated before answering. "It is Enkara, my lord." A Sumerian name, Harry thought, carefully hiding his surprise. This might be the oldest vampire I've ever encountered. He maintained his composure, keeping his tone cold and authoritative. "Enkara, you have allied with an enemy of mine and dared to trespass into my domain. I cannot allow such insolence to go unpunished." Enkara's eyes widened slightly, hope flickering in her gaze. Punishment meant she might survive, at least for now. "Of course, my lord, this one understands." She bowed her head submissively before adding, "If that young lich is your enemy, I could kill him for you. I could bring you his head and the heads of his followers." Harry shook his head. "No. That task is mine alone." He couldn't entrust Voldemort's destruction to anyone else. The Dark Lord's mastery of magic and his cautions against death required Harry's direct intervention. He could never rest at ease unless he saw his demise in person. "I have a different task for you," he continued. "Once it is complete, you and your entire clan will leave the British Isles and never return." Enkara's eyes widened further, this time in genuine surprise. Leaving the cursed lands was no punishment. It was a blessing. She had already regretted returning to Britain, and now she silently vowed never to make such a mistake again. "What is the task, my lord?" she asked eagerly. The sooner she could accomplish it, the sooner this would be all over. Harry felt the Arkstone's borrowed magic waning, the reservoir nearly depleted. "I have to act now." "There is something I must do before revealing your task," he replied. "Something more?" Enkara asked, her weariness returning. Harry pointed his staff at her, the glowing tip intensifying. "Since I cannot trust your word, I will bind you to my will." "Bind me?" Panic surged through her. Vampires lacked souls, rendering magical oaths and unbreakable vows useless. But as undead beings they were susceptible to necromantic bindings, spells that made them utterly subservient to their master. Enkara hesitated, her mind racing. A binding would strip her of freedom, condemning her to eternal servitude. While trying to learn more about this version of Voldemort, Harry had read a large amount of books about necromancy. Not enough to call himself an expert by any means, but he could at least be considered knowledgeable and more than capable of forming a permanent bind with an undead. The complicated part was the will of the target. A low-rank undead like a zombie or a reanimated skeleton would have little will left, making them easy to bind. But vampires were much different. They had a lot more resistance and an ancient vampire lord like this one would be completely impossible to bind unless she allowed the magic to take effect out of her own free will. "If you refuse," Harry said, his voice cold as winter's bite, "I will have no choice but to end you." His robes seemed to expand. shadows pooling around him like a living void. "Wait, my lord," she cried out, trembling. I'll do it. Perform the binding." She hated this more than anything, but it was still preferable to having her existence erased. Harry inwardly sighed with relief. He couldn't afford a drawn-out battle, not with time running short. "Wise choice," he said curtly. He channeled the remnants of the Arkstone's magic, his staff radiating a purplish beam of light that struck the vampire squarely. Ankara stood still, submitting to the spell. A thin thread of dark energy connected them, and Harry focused all his magic on forming the bond. Harry poured everything he had into the spell, the Arkstone's magic draining rapidly. The connection deepened, and with a final surge of power, the binding took hold. It was done. Harry could feel the link between them, an unbreakable tether that ensured her loyalty. Ankara, once a terrifying predator, was now bound to his will. "It seems I've just acquired a very useful tool," Harry thought, suppressing a smirk. "Ankara," he called. "Master," she replied, falling to her knees. Despite her pride, she found herself strangely at ease. Those piercing green eyes held an authority she could not deny. Harry nodded, the weight of exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "I will now explain your task." 3 days before the second task, Hogwarts Castle. It was a quiet night. The corridors, bathed in shadow, carried the stillness of midnight. But that stillness was broken by 2 sets of hurried footsteps echoing against the stone floor tiles. Severus Snape moved swiftly, his sharp eyes darting around as he led the way. His paranoia was palpable. This mission demanded absolute secrecy, and no one could witness it. Behind him, Professor Rookwood followed at an unhurried pace. But his demeanor was strikingly different from usual. The typically vacant expression was replaced by a cruel grin that stretched unnervingly across his face. His unnaturally red eyes gave away who was the one in charge of this body. "This way." "Almost there," Snape whispered. Rookwood chuckled, his voice carrying a mocking edge. "You think I don't remember where the office is?" Snape ignored him, keeping his focus on their surroundings. The less they spoke, the better. When they reached the gargoyle guarding the entrance to the headmaster's office, Snape sighed in relief. The small stone wedge he'd placed earlier to keep the passage open was still in place. With a firm push, the statue moved aside, revealing the spiraling staircase. "I'll go first," Snape muttered, glancing back. Rookwood, or rather Voldemort, gave him a nod. The Dark Lord had entrusted much to Snape, and so far the gamble appeared to be paying off. If the curse placed on Dumbledore had worked as intended, tonight's mission would be disturbingly simple. Together the 2 men ascended the staircase and stepped inside the headmaster's office. Voldemort, inhabiting the flesh puppet of Rookwood, already had his wand in hand. While he appeared composed, he understood the limitations of this form. The flesh puppet's body lacked magical potency, making him vulnerable in any serious duel. Still, if Severus had done his job, there wouldn't be much of a fight. And if he hasn't, Voldemort's thoughts darkened momentarily as he imagined the excruciating punishments he would inflict on the potions master for treachery. "My lord," Snape whispered, breaking the silence. Voldemort's attention shifted to the slumped figure at the desk. Albus Dumbledore was fast asleep. His upper body sprawled over scattered papers. The sight sent Voldemort a rush of exhilaration. The room was as it should be. The enchanted paintings were obscured with an obstruction jinx, no doubt Snape's handiwork, and Dumbledore's wand lay carelessly on the desk. Voldemort snatched it with a quick, fluid motion. "Why take unnecessary risks?" he mused to himself. But something was amiss. His eyes fell on the perch in the corner of the room. "Where is the phoenix?" he asked, his voice sharp. Snape glanced at the empty perch, feigning surprise. "I don't know, my lord. It wasn't here the last time I checked." Voldemort didn't appear fully convinced, but chose not to dwell on it. "It often disappears on its own," Snape added. "It won't return unless called. We should proceed quickly." Voldemort nodded, reluctantly agreeing. He turned his wand toward the slumbering figure. Voldemort frowned, his expression unreadable. "Is something wrong?" Snape's voice wavered, beads of sweat forming on his brow. I can't detect any magic on him, Voldemort thought. It was unsettling. Even with the curse draining Dumbledore's strength, the Dark Lord had expected some trace of resistance. But there was nothing. The man before him was as defenseless as a muggle. It's nothing, Voldemort said after a pause. Let's wake him, shall we? With a flick of his wand, an invisible force shoved Dumbledore from his desk, sending him crashing into the stone wall. Ugh! Dumbledore groaned, his body crumpling to the floor. My Lord, Snape hissed, his irritation barely concealed. We agreed to be quiet. This isn't subtle at all. Voldemort chuckled darkly. Do you have any idea how long I've waited for this moment? Let me savor it. Dumbledore stirred, struggling to his feet. He clutched at a nearby chair for support, his piercing blue eyes locking onto his intruders. Severus? His voice was hoarse, tinged with disbelief. What is the meaning of this? Voldemort's grin widened, his satisfaction plain. I wish I could draw this out further, Voldemort said mockingly. But here's the short version. Your loyal Severus has betrayed you. Dumbledore's expression faltered. He staggered toward the large window behind his desk, leaning against it for support. Betrayed, he repeated, his voice trembling. How could you, Severus? The curse that reduced you to this pitiful state. Voldemort sneered. That was my gift. I stripped you of your magic, and now, he raised his wand, the tip glowing menacingly. I will take your life. Please, no. Dumbledore clasped his hands together, his eyes wide with desperation. Don't kill me. The plea gave Voldemort pause. His grin faded, replaced by a look of disgust. This is pathetic, he muttered. You once hailed as the next coming of Merlin, reduced to this? Without further hesitation, he uttered the words, Avada Kedavra. The deadly green light struck Dumbledore squarely in the chest, sending him tumbling backward out of the open window. For a moment silence filled the room. Both men stood still, the enormity of the act sinking in. But the stillness was soon followed by a thud noise, caused by the body of the headmaster hitting the rooks at the bottom of the tower. It is done, Voldemort murmured at last. Years of planning, hatred and anticipation culminated in this moment. Hogwarts was nearly his. With Dumbledore gone, there was no one left to oppose him. All that's left is to ensure no one discovers this. Voldemort said, turning to Snape. Clean this mess and delay anyone from uncovering the truth. I don't want my plans disrupted. Yes, my lord, Snape replied, bowing his head. Voldemort allowed himself a rare smile. In 3 days this castle will be mine. Harry, are you even listening to me? Neville shouted, tugging at his robes in frustration. Shh! Stop making a fuss and come with me. We don't have all day, Harry replied, his voice a mix of urgency and irritation. But I can't find Lyra anywhere. How can you not be worried? Something could have happened to her. Neville insisted, his concern unmistakable. Harry stopped, glancing around to ensure they were alone in this deserted wing of the castle. Didn't you figure out the task already? Surely you managed that much. Harry's voice was low but sharp, his patience wearing thin. I did? Neville fished a few leaves from his pocket and held them up triumphantly. I got the egg underwater and heard the clue. The task is underwater. Look, this is gillyweed. You won't be needing that, remember? Harry said flatly. And that's not the part that I was referring to. Neville froze as he thought about the next part of the message. The leaves still clutched in his hand. You mean, we've taken what you'll sorely miss? Oh no, I thought it meant something like an important object, a family heirloom or something. Are you saying they took her? But are they really going to put people inside the lake? That's crazy. That's Hogwarts for you. Harry shook his head. He'd known from the beginning that Neville's greatest treasure wasn't an object, but his sister Lyra. Harry would have preferred someone else. Ron perhaps would have been taken instead, but the Weasleys were still taking refuge at his home, making Laura the most obvious choice. Despite the risks, Harry had taken every precaution to ensure Lyra's safety during the task. She'll be fine. Now come on, we need to hurry before anyone sees us, Harry said, steering Neville down the corridor. This isn't the way to the headmaster's office, Neville said nervously as he noticed that Harry was leading him toward the dungeons. You'll see soon enough. Harry didn't bother explaining. Minutes later, the reason for their detour became clear. Neville stopped abruptly, his face draining of color. Snape's office? Not giving him time to panic, the door creaked open, and the familiar voice of Professor Snape greeted them. "It's Professor Snape to you, Longbottom," he sneered. "Oh? Sorry," Neville stammered, his voice trembling. Snape turned to Harry. "Did anyone see you coming here?" he asked, poking his head into the corridor and glancing both ways. "No. Everyone should already be at the lake. That's why we waited until the last moment," Harry said, brushing off the concern. Snape muttered something unintelligible under his breath before ushering them inside. "Good. We've only 30 minutes until it begins. Let's get this matter solved already." Inside the office, a wooden box rested on the last table at the far end. Snape walked over and opened it, producing 2 potions. "You know how this works already, so I won't explain. Drink it, but change your clothes first," he instructed. Neville hesitated, eyeing the potion nervously. Harry was far less squeamish, downing his dose before pulling a set of robes over his head. Moments later, Neville doubled over, his stomach lurching as his body twisted and transformed. "Arr!" Neville groaned, trying to steady himself. "Don't you dare ruin my robes." Harry scolded, his voice sharp. Snape's cold eyes scrutinized them both, ensuring the transformations were flawless. Harry stepped to a nearby mirror, checking his reflection. As before, the polyjuice potion had worked perfectly. No one would be able to tell that he wasn't the boy who lived. "Harry, where should I sit?" Neville asked shakily. "Go to the Gryffindor section of the stands. You'll find my parents and the Ludgards there. Stay with them. They'll protect you." Harry's tone left no room for argument. He'd warned his parents that something might happen during the task. Though the chances of them needing to fight were slim, Harry wasn't willing to leave them unprepared. Neville blinked, confused. "Protect me? From what? I'm just going to be sitting in the stands." Snape remained silent, observing Harry with an inscrutable expression. Even he wasn't entirely sure how Harry planned to keep his bold promises of defeating the Dark Lord today. Dumbledore had insisted over and over that Harry could handle the task, that he had a plan, but Snape struggled to accept that, even knowing how powerful Harry had become. But it was too late to go back now. The cards were on the table now, he could only hope he was on the winning side. "You'll be fine, Neville. Just stay with them. And don't be surprised if they say anything strange. They already know who you are." "They do," Neville exclaimed, his nerves briefly giving way to relief. If nothing else, he wouldn't have to pretend to be Harry in front of them, something that he had proven to be incapable of doing. "Yes, but the rest of the audience doesn't know. So watch what you say, and how you act. You have to pretend to be me in public. Understand?" "Right, I'll do my best," Neville said, trying to muster some confidence. "Well then," Snape said, his dark eyes narrowing as he turned to Neville. "The great champion shouldn't keep everyone waiting, should he?" "Harry, are you sure you don't need the gillyweed?" Neville asked, holding out the slimy plant. Harry waved it off. "I hate that stuff. I've got a different plan this time." "This time?" Neville echoed, confused. "When have you done this before?" Harry smirked but didn't answer, walking out of the office and leaving Neville to ponder the mysteries of his friend's past adventures. "Where is he? We need to get started already," Mr. Crouch said, pacing back and forth, his impatience palpable. "I'd like to know that too. I haven't seen Dumbledore in days," Madame Maxime said, glancing at Professor McGonagall. "And Karkaroff. No news about him either, I suppose?" "I'm afraid not," McGonagall replied, her lips pressed tightly together. She glanced at the Durmstrang professor acting as a substitute for Karkaroff, and sighed. "I'm sure the headmaster has a very important reason for his absence." In truth, she hadn't seen Dumbledore either, and it was making her increasingly uneasy. All she got were some excuses from Snape and a written note from the man himself, informing her that he was going to be taking care of some unspecific emergency. It was all very suspicious to her, as this was not something he would normally do. A young ministry official approached in a rush. "Mr. Crouch, sir, Neville Longbottom has arrived." "Well, that's something. At least all the champions are accounted for," Crouch said. If Dumbledore insists on missing this event, we'll just have to carry on without him. McGonagall was about to protest when she spotted Snape approaching. She turned sharply to him. "Where have you been?" Snape's expression was unreadable. As usual, for reasons known only to him, he seemed to have some inkling of Dumbledore's whereabouts, but no matter how many times she asked, he refused to elaborate, only insisting the headmaster was busy with important business. "I had to handle some last-minute matters," Snape replied smoothly. "So you don't know where Dumbledore is either?" Crouch asked, his brows furrowing in frustration. "I'm afraid not," Snape said. His tone clipped. "That's it then," Crouch declared. "The stadium is packed, and we can't keep the audience waiting any longer. Professor McGonagall will act as Hogwarts representative in Dumbledore's place." "I agree," Madame Maxime said. "The waters will only grow colder as the day progresses." Her concern for Fleur was evident. Vila and cold water were a poor combination, and she couldn't hide her unease. "I'll handle the opening if there are no objections," Crouch said curtly. "Get everyone into position." Harry, who was disguised as Neville, was led by boat to one of the 4 wooden platforms constructed in the middle of the Black Lake. The platforms were designed to hold spectators as well as champions, with many audience members watching from stands on the shore. Harry knew his parents, the Lovegoods and the real Neville, were seated among the crowd, keeping up appearances. His heart thudded, but not from nerves about the task. Thanks to his new spy within Voldemort's ranks, Harry knew exactly what the Dark Lord had planned. With Dumbledore absent and the castle's wards weakened, Voldemort intended to attack on 2 fronts. Half of his forces would storm the front gates of Hogwarts, while the other half would target the lake, aiming to subdue the gathered crowd. There was also a likelihood of a third assault on Hogsmeade to remove any possible routes of escape for the castle occupants. The defenses around the lake were alarmingly sparse. Only a handful of Aurors had been sent by the Ministry, Aurors loyal to the Minister, who was nothing more than one of Voldemort's puppets. Aside from James Potter and a few other Order of the Phoenix members, there were few who would stand and fight when the Death Eaters arrived. Harry glanced at the lake's dark waters. Voldemort had also arranged a surprise for the so-called boy who lived, and it was something Harry would have to deal with on his own. "Are you nervous?" Cedric asked, placing a reassuring hand on Neville's shoulder. Harry shook his head. "I'm fine." His colder-than-usual tone might have been interpreted as nervousness, but the truth was far from it. He was already calculating his next moves. Not far off, Victor Crumb stood with his usual scowl. "I am not losing this time," he said curtly. Meanwhile, Fleur stared at the water, her face pale. This task terrified her far more than facing a dragon. Not only was water her weakness, but her younger sister was one of the hostages. The thought of failing her made her hands tremble slightly. The crowd's energy was extremely high at the present moment, with a wave of excitement and anticipation as they watched the champions prepare. Harry scanned the audience briefly, catching sight of his parents and the Lovegoods in the Gryffindor stands. Even from a distance, he could see his father's tense posture, his hand gripping his wand. His mother leaned in, whispering something to Luna's father. "Stay sharp," Harry thought, directing the silent command to them. He needed everyone in position. The calm before the storm wouldn't last much longer. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second task of the Tri-Wizard Tournament." Mr. Crouch's magically amplified voice echoed across the lake. The crowd roared with excitement, their cheers reverberating through the chilly air. Crouch raised a hand, silencing the crowd. "Last night, something was stolen from each of our champions. A treasure, if you will. These 4 treasures now lie at the bottom of the Black Lake. Each champion must retrieve their treasure and return to the surface as quickly as possible. The time limit is 1 hour. Failure to retrieve the treasure within that time will result in disqualification." As the crowd murmured with excitement, Harry let his magical senses extend into the depths of the lake. "Wait for me, Lyra. I'll get you out in no time," he thought. He had already located her and the other hostages, their faint magical signatures glowing like distant stars in the darkness below. "The task will begin at the sound of the cannon," Crouch announced. Harry braced himself as the tension mounted. Boom! The cannon fired and the crowd erupted into cheers. "Start!" Crouch shouted. Without hesitation, the 4 champions dove into the freezing water, their figures vanishing into the lake's inky depths. The second task had begun. As his body broke the surface of the water, Harry's improvised protective charm enveloped him in a shimmering bubble, unlike Cedric's and Fleur's, which only covered their heads. Harry's magic formed a larger sphere that surrounded his entire body, allowing him ample space to maneuver without being drenched by the icy lake. The moment he descended into the dark depths, the world above dissolved into silence. Visibility was minimal, with the lake's murky waters pressing around him. He spotted the other champions as they began their descent. Crumb had used a unique partial human transfiguration, morphing his upper body into a half-shark, complete with gills and powerful fins. It was an impressive and intimidating sight. Fleur and Cedric, by contrast, relied on standard bubblehead charms, their enchanted pockets of air glowing faintly in the gloom. Harry barely spared them a glance. His task had nothing to do with competition. The tournament didn't matter, not the fame, the glory, or the prize. The only thing that mattered was getting Lyra out of the lake safely. Propelling himself downward with a burst of wind magic, Harry moved quickly, his wand guiding him like a rudder. As he descended further, the water grew colder, and the darkness deepened to near total blackness. He didn't need light charms, though. His magical senses reached out like tendrils, honing in on the unmistakable magical signatures tied to the hostages. At the heart of the merfolk city, he reached the plaza. It was eerily beautiful, illuminated alently by bioluminescent algae and small glowing stones. At the center, tied to a massive stone statue of a merman, were 4 figures: Cho Chang, Hermione, Fleur's younger sister Gabrielle, and Lyra. Harry's heart tightened as he spotted his sister. She appeared unharmed, the hibernation charm leaving her in a peaceful slumber, but he could sense the faint hum of additional magic around her bindings. A trap, he thought grimly, his mind flashing back to the Triwizard Cup in the maze years ago. The memory of being portkeyed to Voldemort's resurrection was seared into his consciousness. He knew the signs well. The ropes around Lyra's feet weren't ordinary. They pulsed faintly with layered magic. He scanned them carefully, quickly confirming his suspicion. This wasn't just a prop for the tournament. It was a portkey, ready to activate the moment he touched her. Who did this? Harry's mind raced. Snape was the most likely culprit. He was close enough to the tournament and had the skills to weave such an enchantment. Surely he was just following his instructions. But a heads up would not have hurt. But Harry didn't have time to dwell on the who or how. What mattered now was keeping Lyra out of Voldemort's hands. The merfolk stirred around him, their glowing eyes and sharp spears cutting through the gloom. They gestured at him impatiently, one sharp finger pointing upward, their message clear: take 1 hostage, only 1. Harry ignored their growing agitation as his gaze swept over the other hostages. Each was unconscious, suspended by magic that ensured their survival underwater. He briefly considered taking all of them, but the merfolk were unlikely to let that happen without a fight, and he had no time for that. Focusing on Lyra, he devised his plan. He couldn't remove the portkey without activating it, but if it activated while she was in his arms, he could control the situation. If they want the boy who lived, they'll get him, he thought grimly. The water around him shimmered with movement. Cedric, Fleur, and Crumb were approaching. He needed to act quickly before they arrived, lest they would also be dragged into this mess along with him. With one decisive motion, Harry gripped Lyra's arm and pulled her into the bubble while slicing through the ropes with a swift, wandless cutting spell. The moment the ropes snapped, the portkey activated. A burst of blinding light exploded from the statue, sending shockwaves through the water. The merfolk recoiled, their sensitive eyes overwhelmed by the brightness. Harry gritted his teeth as he felt the familiar stomach-twisting pull of the portkey. The underwater gloom vanished in an instant. Harry's feet hit solid ground as the disorienting spin of the portkey ceased. The air was damp and cold, filled with the stench of decay. Slowly he raised his wand, illuminating the scene. They were standing in the middle of a graveyard. The tall, weathered tombstones and crooked iron gates were unmistakable. It was Little Hangleton Cemetery, a place he was unfortunately very familiar with. Lyra stirred in his arms, groaning softly. Harry held her upright as she regained consciousness. His wand hand remained steady, scanning the shadows for any sign of danger. The protective bubble had dissipated, leaving them exposed to the cemetery's cold, oppressive atmosphere. Lyra's eyes fluttered open, and she coughed, the foul air shocking her fully awake. "Neville?" she croaked, her voice hoarse. Where are we?" "Not Hogwarts," Harry muttered grimly. Lyra glanced around, her confusion giving way to fear as she took in the eerie surroundings. The darkened sky, the gnarled trees and the cracked tombstones made it clear this wasn't any ordinary place. "What's going on?" she whispered, clutching his arm. Before Harry could respond, a chilling sound echoed across the graveyard. The snap of footsteps on wet grass. Harry tensed, raising his wand higher. His sharp green eyes scanned the shadows until a bone-chilling voice broke the silence. Well, it seems our guest of honor has arrived, with company." Before Harry could answer her, they were interrupted by the sound of strange-sounding laughter. "Look who it is. No other than the marvelous boy who lived." Barty Crouch Jr. came into view. He waved his wand around in a threatening manner and flicked his tongue. Lyra was startled by the sudden appearance, and by the fact that she now realized where she was. This is a cemetery. She had no idea how they got there. Her latest recollection was falling asleep inside Professor Snape's office, along with the other hostages. But now that her mind was working properly, she also realized that the person at her side was not Neville. "Harry?" she asked, in a whisper. "It's okay. I got this." He still looked very much like Neville, but the confidence in his expression was all Lyra needed to confirm his identity. "Oh, he's got this. How brave," Crouch Jr. chuckled. "Barty, now is not the time for games." A harsh voice came from the other side of the cemetery. "We must capture the boy without fail." An old man wearing black robes approached. "Come on, Yaxley. I missed the last hunt. Let me have a bit of fun," Barty Crouch Jr. complained. He can't escape anyways. He is already ours, so let's get this over with," another person said as they came into the picture. It was a very tall and strong-looking man. He wore the same robes as the others, but his face was still covered by a white mask, making it difficult to guess his identity. "See? McNair agrees. Where's he going to go? As long as we have that thingy." He pointed at the metallic object in Yaxley's hand, the portable blood ward their master had created for them. Yaxley grumbled. "Drop your wand, boy. You have no chance against the three of us, so save yourself some suffering at least." "What about the girl?" McNair asked. "We only need the boy. Kill the other one," Yaxley replied. Barty licked his lips. What a waste. His wand moved like lightning and aimed directly at Lyra. Avada Kedavra! Yaxley and McNair acted at the same time, sending a disarming charm and a stunner directly at Neville. "Harry!" Lyra didn't even have her wand with her, so she could only scream for help. Not that it was necessary at all, since Harry was already next to her. "There's no need to scream," Harry groaned as he felt the pain in his ears. His sister had really powerful lungs at least. "Huh?" Lyra could have sworn she saw a killing curse flying directly at her. But there was nothing there now. The three Death Eaters were equally confused about what had happened to their spells. They all disappeared before hitting their intended targets. After a moment of silence, one of them raised their voice to ask, "What happened?" Barty was looking around as if he was trying to find the missing spells. "Does it look like we know?" Yaxley glared at Neville. "The boy may be more skilled than we gave him credit for." It was the only explanation he could think of, but Neville had done something to defend himself. Then Barty clenched his teeth. "We fire again." Avada Kedavra! Another flash of green light was aimed at Lyra. "Crucio!" McNair got more serious now and used his favorite spell against Neville. Yaxley added a petrifying curse for good measure. This time, they were all paying much closer attention to what was happening. If Neville made any movement to block the spells, they wouldn't miss it. And they didn't miss it. Despite the gloomy atmosphere, it was still daytime, so when three pure black holes appeared around the two students, they were able to spot them. What they didn't notice were the holes manifesting behind them. That was all McNair had time to say. As Barty Crouch Jr.'s killing curse entered one of the holes around Harry, it emerged from the one behind him and struck McNair directly in the back. The lifeless body of McNair fell forward, hitting the ground with a loud thud. Yaxley also fell, but he was luckier than his partner, as he became a victim of his own petrifying curse. Ma! Barty Crouch let out a blood-curdling scream as the Cruciatus curse landed on him, causing him to lose his balance. "How did you do that?" Lyra asked. She had seen her brother do a lot of strange things with magic over the years, but this was new. "I can't believe he'd only send these 3 idiots. It's kind of insulting." Harry pulled out a small flask from his robes and drank it. As he did, the transformation from the polyjuice potion began to fade. He no longer needed it, and felt much more comfortable in his own body. "Harry," Lyra stared at her brother as he regained his normal appearance. "Why you?" "Arg!" Barty, still twitching in pain, remained conscious just long enough to see him change and realize they had been deceived. "Why, you're not. No, I'm not Neville, sorry about that." Harry pointed his wand at Yaxley first. An explosive charm made quick work of the old wizard, shattering his head into hundreds of pieces. The petrifying curse made the gruesome scene slightly less horrifying than it could have been. "Ah," Lyra was startled. "Give me a warning, will you?" Barty's eyes widened with fear as he realized what was happening. His shaking hand tried to reach for his wand, which had fallen just a foot away. "Now, let's." Harry suddenly stopped moving. An unpleasant sensation washed over him. "What's wrong?" Lyra noticed his odd reaction and became worried. "He's already there," Harry thought. "Hogwarts is being invaded," he said. "Hogwarts? Invaded?" Lyra exclaimed. "What are you talking about? Who is invading it?" Her eyes moved over to Barty Crouch Jr. This was exactly what Harry had been waiting for, but it also meant he needed to return quickly and make that things stayed in control. "Can't waste any more time with you lot." Harry aimed his wand at the head of Barty Crouch Jr. He had nothing useful to learn from this one, so eliminating a threat took priority. "Wait," Barty shouted. He knew he had to say something, anything, immediately, or else he'd be dead long before reaching his wand. "I know you." Harry raised an eyebrow. "I'll make this quick." The tip of his wand began to glow. "Wait, you're Harry Potter. Your family is in danger." Lyra hurried to Harry's side. "Whoa, what? Our family? What is he talking about?" She looked up at her brother for answers. Harry stared at Barty Crouch's son, as he also had no idea of what he was talking about. His knowledge of this particular Death Eater was limited, but that hardly mattered. Anyone in Barty's position would say anything to survive. "You expect me to believe that? At least die with some pride instead of spewing nonsense." Harry was quickly losing patience. "It's true. I'm telling the truth." Harry was just about to end this miserable man's life, but Barty's next words managed to stop him. "It's Wormtail. He found them." Lyra's eyes widened at the name. She was familiar with her parents' old stories from their school days, and the Marauder's adventures were her favorite. "Wasn't that one of Dad's friends?" Lyra asked, still unaware of the darker parts of the story. She didn't know about the rat's betrayal that led to Sirius's death. "Wormtail is here." Harry hadn't thought he'd hear that name again and had almost forgotten about him. In this timeline, Wormtail had been solely responsible for what happened to Sirius. "I've been meaning to get my hands on that rat, but still." Harry's eyes moved back to Barty. Barty didn't appear to be lying, but if his house were under attack, Harry was certain he'd have sensed it immediately. "We have someone inside the Ministry who's an expert in tracking wizards and witches. He's been trying to locate the Weasley family since they disappeared and managed to find their general location." "Oh no," Lyra muttered. If someone could track the Weasleys, it meant they could also find the Potter family manor. Wormtail seemed to remember something about that area, something from his old days as a friend of the Potters. Barty added. "I see," Harry murmured. Now sure, Barty wasn't making this up. The defenses around his family's property should have removed any memories of its location from Wormtail's mind, but under specific circumstances there were ways to partially recover them. The chances of that rat finding their home were Not 0 at least. I'll tell you everything. Just let me go, okay? Barty pleaded. Lyra frowned. There was no way they could trust this shady man. All the while Barty had been subtly moving his hand, trying to divert their attention from what he was really doing. A sly smile appeared on his face as his index finger touched the wood of his wand. With a swift motion, he grabbed hold of it and twisted his body to aim at his target. "Harry," Lyra shouted in an attempt to warn him. Harry's body moved like a blur. In a single instant he knelt and pressed his wand against Barty Crouch Jr.'s temple. The Death Eater had only a fraction of a second to feel an agonizing pain before his body disintegrated into dust. Oh! It all happened too fast for Lyra to process. One moment she had been startled, the next, the source of her fear had literally vanished. Harry stood back up and brushed the dust off his robes. "You seriously thought I didn't notice your true intentions?" "Is he dead?" Lyra asked, immediately realizing how dumb her question sounded when she saw her brother's expression. "Yes, Lyra, he is. Transfiguring a living being into a gaseous substance tends to have that effect." Harry looked around. There were no other magical signatures. These 3 had been the only ones Voldemort had sent to capture him. Either Voldemort didn't take the rumors about Neville's magical prowess seriously, or this wasn't high on his list of priorities for the day. "Harry, was he telling the truth? Is our family in danger? If someone attacks our house now," Lyra trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Right now there were 3 families staying there. James and Lily had come to Hogwarts, but their little sister, Holly, was still at home. "Holly's." "I know," Harry interrupted. He didn't need to be reminded of that. Lyra was about to speak again when she saw Harry's expression shift, just as it had before. "They dare." Harry's green eyes began to glow as powerful magic surged through him. His wand vanished, promptly replaced by his goblin-forged steel staff. Neville's borrowed robes were consumed by the death visage, which conjured a new set of black robes over him. The 9 Arkstone jewels appeared out of nowhere and moved into place. Rings adorned his fingers, a necklace circled his neck, bracelets formed around his wrists, and the last 2 jewels tied around his ankles, completing the formation. Lyra stared in shock as her brother transformed. She noted how his entire demeanor shifted from a confident, reliable older brother to the battle-hardened wizard who had survived countless fights. This was the same Harry who, just 2 years prior, had battled that colossal snake outside Hogwarts. Harry turned to his sister and extended his hand. "Let's go. We have a home to save first. I don't see anything but trees." A burly man clad in black robes muttered while pacing in circles, his eyes scanning the dense forest. "Are you sure it's here?" asked another equally large man mirroring the first's movements. Comment. "Yes, I'm sure." A third figure crouched low to the ground, sniffed the air and the grass in frustration. "Crab, Goyle, shut your mouths and let the rat work," snapped Bellatrix Lestrange, her icy voice cutting through the air. Instantly, silence fell. Despite their thick-headedness, even Crabbe and Goyle Sr. knew better than to irritate Bellatrix when she was in one of her moods. And right now, her mood was downright murderous. Bellatrix let out a shriek of frustration, flinging her black umbrella to the ground before smashing a nearby tree branch with her bare hands. Nothing but grass, flowers and trees. What a disgusting place. "Miss Bellatrix," Goyle yelped, panicking as her discarded umbrella left her exposed. The sun in this part of Britain was mild, but it was still daylight, and vampires were notoriously vulnerable to sunlight. "The sun," Crabbe shouted, pointing skyward. "The sun." He scrambled to retrieve the umbrella, fearing she would burst into flames at any moment, and attempted to return it back to her. "Do you two think I'm an idiot?" Bellatrix hissed, her sharp yellow eyes narrowing dangerously. She pulled back the black robes, covering her arms, revealing pale, glittering skin. With a flick of her wand, her flesh shimmered as if made of diamonds. "I can protect myself from sunlight just fine." "Magic," Crabbe mumbled, scratching his head. "But vampires can't do magic," Goyle added, equally confused. "They're simpletons, Lady Bellatrix," Wormtail muttered as he slunk closer, his hunched figure casting a shadow over the grass. Your gift isn't exactly common knowledge among the Dark Lord's ranks. It was well known that vampires couldn't wield magic in the same way wizards and witches could. However, rare vampires could awaken unique gifts that set them apart. These abilities elevated their status, often placing them above even older, more experienced vampires. Bellatrix's gift was an extraordinary one at that. She retained her ability to perform wand magic. While her spells were largely limited to dark magic, it was still a formidable advantage when combined with her vampire speed, strength, and senses. This, coupled with her fanatical loyalty, had made her Voldemort's second-in-command with no contest. "Forget about me," Bellatrix scoffed, her lip curling disdainfully. "Focus on finding those traitors." The cowardly Wormtail needed no further prompting, returning to the ground to sniff and crawl like the rat he was. "This place. It feels familiar," he muttered, frustration clear in his voice. "I know I've been here before, but the protections, they've erased it from my memory." The group had narrowed their search to this field, but there were still miles of forest and grassy plains to comb through. The wards around Potter Manor rendered it completely invisible, even to seasoned dark wizards. If they could at least find the edge of the wards, they could attempt to break through using the bludgeoning approach, a crude brute force method of dismantling magical defenses. But until then they were grasping at shadows. An hour passed with no progress. "Bloody hell," Bellatrix screamed, stomping the ground in frustration. Her yellow eyes blazed with fury. "At this rate I'm going to miss my lord's conquest of Hogwarts. I won't allow that to happen. I need to be at his side when he claims his victory." "This is bad," Goyle muttered nervously. "Very bad," Crabbe agreed. Wormtail felt their eyes boring into his back, their unspoken accusations weighing on him. "Don't look at me like that," he snapped. "I'm trying my best." He could feel the noose tightening. If they failed to locate Potter Manor, their deaths at Bellatrix's hands were all but guaranteed, and even if the Dark Lord would likely scold her for that, that was not going to help them right now. Bellatrix's patience finally snapped. She raised her wand and began hurling fireballs in every direction. "That's it! I had it! Lady Bellatrix, please stop." Goyle ducked behind a tree, narrowly avoiding a blazing projectile. "You traitorous fools," she shrieked. "Get over here. I'm going to rip your skulls out and turn them into a necklace." Wormtail, trembling, was about to transform into a rat and flee when something caught his eye. One of Bellatrix's fireballs exploded mid-air as if it had struck an invisible barrier. Wait, Lady Bellatrix," he cried, pointing. "There's something there." Bellatrix's eyes gleamed with predatory delight. She had not missed it either. "There is something there." She stalked forward, wand raised. "Did we find it?" Crabbe asked hesitantly. "Is it finally over?" Goyle added. "What do you mean we?" Bellatrix sneered. "I found it. If you imbeciles were more useful, we'd have done this hours ago. Why didn't we do this from the beginning?" "Well, that would have completely given away our intentions to the ones inside the house," Wormtail said without thinking. "Silence," Bellatrix snapped, her gaze sharp enough to cut steel. "So what? Do you think I'm afraid of a pack of cowardly traitors hiding behind wards?" "No, of course not," Wormtail hurried to say. "As long as my lady is with us, there is no enemy to fear." Ignoring him, Bellatrix approached the spot where her spell had collided with the invisible barrier. "Now, let's get in there." Her voice was brimming with eager anticipation. "Move aside," Bellatrix barked, pointing her wand at the seemingly empty space before her. "Lady Bellatrix, what spell are you planning on us?" Crabbe Senior's question was cut short. "Fiend fire," Bellatrix cried, her face lighting up with glee. The destructive spell was her favorite, and she was ecstatic to still wield it even after becoming a vampire. "No, you're going to destroy everything," Wormtail squealed, scrambling away as fast as he could. Bellatrix had given them no warning before unleashing one of the most dangerous spells in existence. "Ah!" Goyle cried, shielding himself as an oppressive heat engulfed the area. From the tip of Bellatrix's wand, a massive flaming crow emerged, its body composed of dark crimson flames. It loomed above her, crackling with raw, destructive energy as she laughed maniacally. "Tear it all down," she shrieked. "Burn the traitors who dared defy my master." The three men could only watch as the fiery bird screeched and flew toward the hidden boundaries of Potter Manor. It promised annihilation, its flames roaring hungrily. But then something unexpected happened. The fiend fire struck and disappeared. The blazing crows seemed to vanish into a void, its light and heat extinguished in an instant. "What in Merlin's bloody balls just happened?" Bellatrix snapped, staring at the empty space where her spell had faded into non-existence. Crabbe and Goyle exchanged nervous glances, completely at a loss for words. Her yellow eyes turned to Wormtail, blazing with fury. Wormtail trembled, knowing he had to say something, just anything, or risk becoming her next victim. It could be the wards," he stammered, his voice barely audible. "The wards," Bellatrix repeated, narrowing her eyes. It wasn't impossible, but she didn't know enough about protective enchantments to confirm it. She cursed herself for not bringing Yaxley, one of their best experts in wards. They had assumed Wormtail would lead them to the manor, and that her power would be enough to tear through any defenses. Crabbe and Goyle had only been brought along for grunt work. "Well then, let's try again," she declared, raising her wand. "There's no way those wards can withstand another fiend fire attack." "Again?" Wormtail exclaimed, taking a step back. "Perhaps we should return later with some proper ward breakers." And he didn't get to finish. In a blur of motion, Bellatrix was upon him, her cold hand wrapping around his throat. She lifted him effortlessly off the ground, her strength vastly surpassing his. "Ugh!" Wormtail wheezed, kicking his legs in a futile attempt to break free. "Do you think I'm going back to my lord with a failed mission?" she hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Me? Bellatrix Lestrange?" Failure was not an option. Not for her. She was Voldemort's right hand, his most loyal and capable follower. She would not return empty-handed, no matter the cost. With a snarl, she flung Wormtail to the ground, just shy of unconsciousness. "Stay there and watch," she commanded. "And don't even think about suggesting retreat again." Wormtail coughed violently, clutching his throat as Crabbe and Goyle helped him to his feet. No one dared to voice another complaint. As Bellatrix prepared to unleash another fiend fire, Wormtail noticed something strange. His face was close to the ground, and amidst his coughing fits, he saw a black substance spreading beneath him. At first he thought it might be a snake, but it moved unnaturally, expanding rapidly like liquid shadow. "Cough! Look! Look!" Wormtail croaked, his panic mounting. His desperate cries caught the attention of Crabbe and Goyle, who glanced down to see the spreading blackness. "What is that?" Crabbe muttered, his voice shaking. The substance had grown alarmingly fast, now forming a large, ominous circle beneath them. "Lady Bellatrix," Crabbe began. "Shut up! I'm focusing," Bellatrix snapped, not bothering to look down. But Goyle stammered, his panic escalating. By the time Bellatrix noticed the strange sensation at her feet, it was too late. The black substance had engulfed the entire area. "What the—" Bellatrix began, but the next moment, darkness swallowed them all. The grassy field was gone and was replaced by an eerie background. "Where did the field go?" Goyle asked, his voice trembling. Not that he expected an answer, but he got one. "The field is exactly where it was before," said a calm, disembodied voice. "It is you four who have been moved away from it." The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, making it impossible to pinpoint its source. "I can't see anything," Crabbe yelled in a panic voice. "Ugh! Let me out!" Goyle exclaimed. "Who's there?" "Show yourself," Bellatrix demanded, her yellow eyes scanning the pitch-black void. "Is it you, Potter?" "J. James is here," Wormtail cried. This would be the last person he wanted to see right now. There was a silent pause after that. "You are partially correct," the voice replied smoothly. "I am a Potter, although not the one you were thinking about." Bellatrix's lips curled into a sneer, but before she could speak, the voice continued. "But that is irrelevant. What matters is this. None of you are ever leaving this space." The darkness shifted, and the four Death Eaters felt an oppressive weight pressing down on them. It was not just the lack of light, It was as though the space itself had turned against them, moments before the attack. Hogshead Tavern. Do you have any idea how worried we were? 3 whole days without contact. Remus Lupin paced back and forth, his movements quick and agitated. Sit down, Lupin. You're ruining the mood, grumbled Alistair Moody, his magical eyes spinning lazily. He took another swig of beer, simply unbothered by the tension that was filling the room. Should you really be drinking so much right now? Kingsley Shacklebolt's deep, calm voice carried an edge of disapproval. Hogsmeade could be in danger at any moment. This Orid had always been a very uptight and correct individual. Seeing his former colleague behaving in such an unprofessional way was not something he could tolerate. We're no longer on official duty, remember? Moody scoffed, slamming his mug down on the bar. The ministry's gone, and so's our authority. Now I can drink whenever I bloody well please. Ah, that's the spirit, and screw the ministry. Aberforth Dumbledore, the owner of the tavern, said, laughing and placing another pint in front of Moody. The group's tension remained palpable until Albus Dumbledore, seated quietly in the corner, finally spoke. His voice was calm but commanding, instantly drawing every gaze in the room to him. In any case, Dumbledore began, his fingers lightly steepled, let me first apologize for keeping you all in the dark these past days. But I assure you it was necessary. At this critical juncture we could not afford the risk of any information falling into the wrong hands. Lupin frowned, crossing his arms. You disappeared without a word, Albus. We were worried sick. Surely you could have. It was for the greater good, Dumbledore interrupted softly. His tone was tinged with regret. Not that he planned on telling anyone either. This whole plan was something he still felt deeply ashamed of. They have caused the death of an innocent muggle in order to deceive Voldemort. Yes, it was a willing participant. An old actor with a terminal disease had agreed to partake in their ruse, in exchange for a large amount of money to be given to his family after his passing as compensation. Harry used human transfiguration to make him look like an exact copy of himself. And they had given him all the information he needed to play a believable part, as well as employ every means they had available to ensure that the muggle could not break character. Dumbledore did not want to think about how many laws they broke on that day, several of them were even written by him. But at least it had worked. Voldemort had accepted it completely, and now he finally had the futtidance to launch a full-on assault of Hogwarts, just like Harry wanted. But when Severus Snape's urgent message warned of an imminent attack on Hogsmeade, Dumbledore had no choice but to act. He may not be able to protect Hogwarts, but he could at least do this part. I trust you had your reasons, Professor. Hagrid rumbled, his large hands gripping the edge of a table. Everyone here believes in you. I didn't say I didn't believe in him. Lupin muttered. Never mind. Is Hogsmeade really going to be attacked? By you know who? The beer glass of Mundungus Fletcher's hands was shaking hard enough to spill the liquid everywhere. Are we enough to stop something like this? Lupin asked, voicing the concern on everyone's mind. The Order's numbers had dwindled. Only 8 members were present, and none could afford the losses that seemed inevitable. Dumbledore had refused Molly and Arthur Weasley's offer to join, as they lacked proper combat training and would only add to the casualties. No. He will not be coming here in person. What we are to face today, I'm honestly not certain, but it will be dangerous nonetheless, even without the presence of the Dark Lord, Dumbledore. And who's protecting Hogwarts if you're here? Aberforth cut in, his sharp gaze fixed on his older brother. Isn't that your job? Albus nodded. Hogwarts is under the protection of someone more capable than myself. The room erupted in murmurs. More capable than you? Hagrid exclaimed. Is this about that mysterious member you've never told us about? Lupin pressed. Moody's magical eye swiveled toward Dumbledore, scrutinizing him. Can you at least tell us their name this time? I'm afraid their identity wouldn't reassure you, Dumbledore said, carefully avoiding the truth. If they knew he'd placed such responsibility in the hands of a 4th-year student, chaos would break out. That would benefit no one. Always so secretive. Daedalus Diggle muttered, adjusting his tall top hat. But you can count on me as always. Dumbledore smiled warmly. Thank you, my friend. The other members gained a bit more confidence after hearing Daedalus speak. He was a short man with a colorful suit and a disproportionately large top hat. But despite his size and looks, no one would dare to undervalue him. He was a veteran who fought in the 2 least wizard wars, and had even survived several encounters against the Dark Lord himself. "All right then, I'll have a beer," before Lupin began. But his words were cut off by the sudden jarring sound of a bell. The room fell silent. "The alarm," Mundungus whispered, his face pale. "It's time," Moody growled, standing abruptly and downing his pint in one swift motion. "Let's get to it." "This is madness," Mundungus protested. "We don't even know what we're up against." "Then let's step outside and find out," Aberforth said curtly, unlocking the doors and striding into the night. Remus was close behind but froze when Aberforth's voice rang out, filled with shock. "Bloody hell." Lupin stepped outside, his breath catching as he followed Aberforth's gaze. Marching toward Hogsmeade's gates was an army, an endless tide of pale, shambling figures. Their eyes glowed with unnatural light, their decayed faces locked in twisted snarls. The wind carried a bone-chilling moan, one that sent shivers down Lupin's spine. An army of the dead. "Bloody hell, what is that?" Mundungus shouted, his voice trembling as he pointed toward the advancing horde. That looks like an army," Daedalus Diggle replied, his voice barely steady. It wasn't just any army. Before them was a grotesque assembly. Rows of inferi marched alongside skeletal warriors and decaying zombies. Among them, hulking undead trolls lumbered forward, and looming at the rear were 2 massive giants, their eyes glowing eerily in the darkness. Horrified murmurs spread through the village as the alarm echoed. Residents peeked out of their homes, only to be frozen by the sight of the nightmare unfolding before their gates. "This is Voldemort's army, or part of it at least," Dumbledore declared calmly. "We knew he had the power of necromancy. This should not surprise us. Still, this is a lot more than I imagined," Kingsley muttered, his eyes narrowing as he analyzed the advancing horde. They of course knew about James and Moody's encounter with the inferi, so this was not new, but the size was still shocking. "You say this is just part of it? Well, if you're thinking of running, now's your chance," Moody growled while glancing at Mundungus. He then readied his wand. "But I'll be damned before I let these creatures destroy Hogsmeade." Kingsley bristled. "Running was never an option for me." He unsheathed his wand, its polished surface gleaming even in the dim light. "I may no longer be officially an Auror, but I still consider my duty to protect the citizens of this country from harm. That's the spirit." Hagrid's booming voice added strength to the group. Dumbledore smiled. "I'm counting on you all." A thin wooden staff appeared on his hand. "What is that? You are using a staff now?" Aberforth noted. Yes. I had some time to visit a couple of nice craftsmen from across the sea." Since he already knew he had to leave his real wand for Voldemort to obtain, he had previously made some preparations in advance. Dumbledore's expression softened as he regarded them. "I trust each of you to fight valiantly. Now, remember, fire is our greatest weapon against the undead. If you can conjure a Patronus, that will also serve you well." "I can do that," Remus said. "Fire. No problem," Moody nodded. "We should intercept the undead before they can reach the gates. If the Inferius get inside the village, it would be a disaster. Those things can move very fast when they want to," Daedalus Diggle said with an expression of concern. "Indeed, we should move quickly." Dumbledore was already walking as he said this. Villagers clustered near the entrance, their faces pale with fear at the sight before them. "Back to your homes. Lock your doors and stay inside," Aberforth barked, waving them off. "Mr. Dumbledore," the villagers recognized the tavern owner immediately. "The headmaster is here too." One of them saw Albus Dumbledore and her face completely changed. "The headmaster of Hogwarts is here to save us." "Now," Dumbledore began, "I need you all to listen. Go back to your homes and lock the doors. Keep your wands ready just in case. 1. These numbers," Mundungus's voice quivered. "It's worse than I thought." Daedalus studied the creatures carefully. "Most of them should fall easily. What concerns me are those trolls and the 2 giants. Even though they have become undead, Would they still retain their magical resistance? Let's give it a try, shall we? Moody moved ahead of the group and pointed his wand at the bulk of the army. In fairness, a roaring fireball shot forward, striking the troll square in the chest. Zombies and skeletons nearby recoiled, emitting guttural moans that scraped against the nerves of all who heard them. At first it seemed effective, but as the smoke cleared, the troll remained standing. Its eyes blazed with greater intensity, and it let out a deafening roar that sent a chill through the group. "Brilliant," Lupin muttered. "Now it's angry." "It didn't do much," Mundungus said. "The inferior advancing," Didylus called out. The group turned to see the front line of inferi break away from the larger army, sprinting with unsettling speed toward the gates. "Expecto Patronum." Lupin's silver fox burst forth from his wand, darting toward the creatures. The Patronus slowed their advance, but only briefly. "Fire spells now," Kingsley bellowed. "Bombarda Maxima. Incendius Totatus. Flammaire." The air filled with a barrage of blazing spells, each one ripping through the ranks of Inferion. The stench of burning flesh and bone filled the air as bodies collapsed into smoldering heaps. Dumbledore stepped forward, raising his staff. "Fawkes." With a piercing cry, the phoenix appeared, its golden-red plumage lighting up the night. Dumbledore's eyes became sharp and steeled. "Go burn them all." Fawkes soared into the fray, raining fire down upon the horde. Inferi ignited wherever the phoenix's flames touched, their twisted forms collapsing into ash. I haven't used it in a long time. I hope I haven't gotten too rusty." Aberforth stepped closer while holding the wand inside his closed fist. "Aurea." Clenching his wand tightly, he punched the ground with a resounding crack. A shockwave erupted, sending Inferian flames hurtling back into the larger mass of undead. The group turned to him, stunned. "Still got it," Aberforth exclaimed with a grin on his beardy face. Albus smiled wryly. "Of course you do. I'm leaving those trolls to you, brother. I'll do something about those giants." "Sure, I'll bury those damn trolls," Aberforth exclaimed. Now that he had his confidence back, he felt capable of anything. "Albus, how are you going to defeat those giants?" Lupin asked. Even thinking about it for a while, he could not come up with any spell capable of taking one monster like that. A normal giant alone would already be difficult to kill, but an undead one was much worse, since they would basically ignore any damage that you caused, as long as it did not completely destroy them. The phoenix flew back and landed on Dumbledore's shoulder. "This old man still has a few tricks left. The rest of you, make sure none of those creatures ever set foot inside the village." After saying that, Fawkes took into the skies while carrying him. Dumbledore hovered above the battlefield, a sea of undead sprawling below him. The two undead giants towered over the rest, their blank white eyes fixing on the phoenix gliding through the air. As their attention shifted to Dumbledore while he was carried by the firebird, they began to move. "Fawkes," Dumbledore called with a note of urgency in his voice. One of the giants swung a massive club at them. No, it was actually a giant tree that had been crudely fashioned into a weapon. Giants weren't very creative craftsmen when it came to weapons and would use whatever large, heavy thing they had close by. It appears that death had not changed that part about them. Fawkes, while still holding Dumbledore by the shoulders with its claws, evaded the attack with a sharp ascent, soaring higher into the sky. The second giant let out a guttural, angry noise as it lumbered closer, crushing skeletons and zombies beneath its enormous feet. The destruction didn't seem to bother it one bit. Dumbledore observed the scene, weighing his options. He couldn't distract the giants forever, and at his advanced age, stamina was a concern. He was no longer the young man who had fought in the Great War, but decades of wisdom had to count for something. Even my strongest fire spell won't be enough to completely destroy one of these monstrosities. Let alone both, he mused. His thoughts turned to fiendfire, dark magic so powerful it could annihilate nearly anything, but even that might not suffice. Fawkes let out a piercing cry, narrowly dodging a massive hand that had attempted to grab them. "I know," Dumbledore said softly, understanding his companion's urgency. They had to hurry up. Reaching into his robes, he pulled out a flying carpet and used it to separate himself from Fawkes. allowing the bird to fly free as it no longer had to carry him. "I've made my decision," Dumbledore murmured, stepping onto the carpet. "And I'll need your help, my friend." Fiendfire wasn't enough, but there was something else at his disposal now. 2 years ago he had learned an intricate piece of elemental magic from a most unlikely source, a mysterious young boy. At the time, Dumbledore had requested the formula out of academic curiosity, never imagining he would use it in a real-life battle, yet here he was. "Harry, you always did surprise me," Dumbledore said aloud, positioning himself just beyond the reach of the giants. Fawkes continued to distract them, their connection so strong that the Phoenix already knew its role in the plan without having to explain anything. The moment Dumbledore made his decision, Fawkes also knew exactly what was expected of him. Standing on the carpet, Dumbledore raised his staff and released it. Rather than falling, it hovered in mid before it began to spin along its vertical axis. "Flamme incendio, Ozig, fulguras." He began invoking a series of fire spells. One after another, the incantations wove together, forming a brilliant sphere of fire before the staff. The sphere grew, both in size and intensity. But this was only the beginning. Fiendfire. As the words left his lips, the surrounding temperature spiked dramatically. A monstrous bird, wings ablaze with dark crimson fire, emerged from the staff and flew into the air while raising the temperature in the entire area. Its cry was different from a good-natured creature such as Fawkes. This one was one of pure fury and rage, a manifestation of the dark emotions Dumbledore rarely showed. Fawkes unleashed one final wave of golden flames on the giants before retreating to Dumbledore's side. "I'm sorry for what comes next, my friend," Dumbledore said softly. But Fawkes did not falter. The dark phoenix of Fiendfire and Fawkes moved closer and closer until they converged in the middle, colliding with the sphere of fire in the process. The resulting explosion of light and energy was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. "It's ready," Dumbledore murmured, his gaze fixed on the miniature sun he had created, and that now hovered before him. The fire burned so intensely that it had lost all color and shone with almost pure white light, its heat so overwhelming that even Dumbledore felt as though he might melt away at any moment. Yet he knew this was only a shadow of the spell's true potential. The version Harry had once cast was much more potent than this one. However, he could not go that far. Without the containment charms that only Harry could conjure, the original spell could end all life on the planet. Even so, this version was a sight to behold, as far as Dumbledore was concerned, and it should be more than enough to end this battle. "It's a shame you never gave it a name, Harry," Dumbledore remarked as he guided the blazing sphere toward the giants. The two undead behemoths, relentless in their pursuit, were halted by the sheer intensity of the spell. The miniature sun hung above them, its heat and light unbearable. A supreme fire magic created by a potter. Dumbledore paused for a second, a faint smile on his lips. "I shall call it Killin." With a snap of his fingers, the sphere descended, engulfing the battlefield in blinding light. The members of the Order of the Phoenix shielded their faces, casting heat-resistant charms as the heat wave washed over them. The blazing inferno lasted only 10 seconds but felt like an eternity. When it subsided, everyone was left shaken. "Merlin, that hurt," Mundungus Fletcher groaned, poking his head out from behind a charred brick fence. His face was flushed red from the residual heat, his charms insufficient to fully protect him. "A little warning would have been nice," muttered Daedalus Diggle, still patting out small embers on his robes. "Whoa!" Hagrid rubbed his wide eyes, staring at the scorched field in front of him. The once vibrant landscape had been reduced to a barren expanse of blackened earth. No vegetation remained. It was as though life itself had been burned away. "He got them all?" Kingsley Shacklebolt asked, scanning the horizon for any signs of movement. "I thought he was only going for the giants." "Not all of them," Moody growled, his magical eye swiveling. He pointed with his wand. "There are a few left crawling around, over there." Remus Lupin followed Moody's gaze and nodded grimly. "Let's finish them off. Don't waste this chance." But Aberforth, Dumbledore's sharp voice interrupted him. "Where's my brother?" Everyone stopped and looked up, expecting to see the headmaster still hovering above the battlefield like they last saw him. but the skies were clear, with no sign of Dumbledore or his flying carpet. "There's something over there," Mundungus called out, pointing to a dark shape on the charred ground. The specks of white in the dark bundles stood out against the ashen field. Aberforth wasted no time, rushing toward the figure. "Albus," he called while running, but got no answer. Hagrid and Remus followed closely, while Moody barked orders at the remaining Order members to handle the crailing undead. "Professor!" Hagrid shouted as they approached. The shape was unmistakable now. It was indeed Dumbledore, curled into a fetal position. His robes were completely scorched, leaving his white hair and beard stark against the blackened ground. "Albus, come on," Remus said urgently, kneeling to perform a quick diagnostic spell. He wasn't a trained healer, but he knew enough to assess the damage. Dumbledore groaned weakly, his body trembling. "He's alive!" Hagrid exclaimed, relief evident in his booming voice. "Oh, no," Aberforth muttered as he helped Remus carefully turn his brother over. His stomach dropped at the sight. The entire right side of Dumbledore's body was burned black, and half of his right arm was missing. "This is awful. These burns," Remus whispered, shaking his head. "They're too severe. We need to get him to St. Mungo's immediately." He also noted the unnatural angles of Dumbledore's legs, likely broken in the fall. "No," Dumbledore rasped, his voice barely audible. "Albus," Remus protested, "you need proper care. The hospital won't be safe," Aberforth interrupted. His tone was bitter, but his reasoning was sound. "That bastard has spies everywhere, remember?" "What about Madame Pomfrey?" Hagrid suggested. "She can fix anything." "She's a great healer," Aberforth conceded, "but I've got someone in Hogsmeade who's just as good. We'll take him there." No time to argue. Remus finished applying emergency charms to stabilize Dumbledore, just enough to move him without worsening his state. "Let's move him quickly," he said, carefully levitating the injured headmaster. Dumbledore stirred weakly, trying to raise his left hand. "Albus, don't," Remus urged. "Save your strength." But Dumbledore's trembling hand pointed towards something on the battlefield. Fawkes. Hagrid was the only one who realized what the headmaster was trying to point to. The Firebird had also disappeared in the blast of fire, but Hagrid knew that even if Fawkes had died during that spell, the bird should be able to reincarnate for as long as he found its remains. He sprinted to the spot, trying to find a pile of ashes that stood out starkly against the scorched ground. The remaining Order members approached, their tasks completed. "You did it, Albus," Moody said, his gruff voice softer than usual. "You took most of them out yourself." "Hogsmeade should be safe now," Kingsley added, though his eyes scanned the horizon warily. "Let's hope none of those things come back," Mundungus muttered, shuddering. As Aberforth and Remus carried Dumbledore toward the healer in Hogsmeade, the others lingered on the battlefield. "We should stay on guard for a while," Moody warned, "just in case more appear." "More?" Mundungus looked horrified. "You think there's more out there?" "With the one behind all this. Always possible," Daedalus said darkly. Before anyone could respond, Hagrid's voice roared across the field. "Found him! I found him!" "What's he yelling about now?" Kingsley asked, watching as Hagrid sprinted to the center of the field. "He was looking for something, I suppose," Daedalus replied with a shrug, although he had no idea what the giant had been trying to find. But the air suddenly grew tense as Moody silenced them with a raised hand. "Hold it, I heard something." The group froze, scanning the charred landscape, expecting to find more of those horrid creatures. For a long minute, all was silent. Then a deafening roar shattered the stillness. "What was that?" Mundungus shouted, covering his ears. "A beast," Kingsley said, his voice grim. "That sounded like a beast roaring." It came from Daedalus turned toward the distant silhouette of Hogwarts Castle. "Get out of there!" Hagrid's frantic scream made their blood run cold. Before anyone could react, a massive shadow passed over them, followed by a thunderous crash. The ground shook violently, nearly toppling them, and the sound of the impact rang in their ears. When they recovered, they turned to see an enormous object embedded in the ground just feet from where they'd stood. "What in Merlin's name?" Mundungus stammered, staring at the massive shape. Who threw a rock at us? That's no rock, Daedalus said, stepping closer. It's bones, Kingsley finished, circling to the other side. His voice dropped. That's a dragon's skull. A dragon's skull? Mundagus exclaimed, his face pale. What's going on in Hogwarts? Remus said with concern. Moments before the attack, Hogwarts Black Lake comment. Who thought this was a good idea for a tournament task? I can't see anything. Lily Potter's frown deepened as she stared at the lake. Harry should be about to resurface at any moment, James said, hoping to get this over with. He did not feel comfortable knowing that his daughter was somewhere inside those dark waters. It had been several minutes since the second task began, but after the champions plunged into the water, there was little to observe from above. The audience murmured in equal frustration, many pulling out magical binoculars to try and glimpse the action beneath the surface. You mean Neville? Luna corrected, pointing at Harry, who sat beside Lily doing his best to remain inconspicuous. Stop fidgeting so much, Daphne muttered, tapping him lightly on the shoulder. Sorry, Neville's nerves were evident. Although he couldn't tell what it was, something was unsettling in the air and it was keeping him on edge, so he began to pull on his robes and move on his seat. Daphne adjusted the hood of her robes to conceal her face further. She had no doubt Voldemort had members of his faction among the audience, and she'd rather not be recognized before it was time. Her eyes scanned the crowd, catching brief flashes of suspicious figures that made her grip her wand tighter beneath her cloak. Lily glanced at her with concern. The situation was growing increasingly dangerous, and she was anxious about Lyra still being underwater. Most of the Order of the Phoenix had been stationed elsewhere, and Lily was sure McGonagall had no idea what was truly happening. I don't like this, Lily murmured, half to herself. Her gaze flickered to James, whose expression, though calm, betrayed a growing tension. Daphne caught Lily's worried expression and decided to reassure her. It's okay, Lily. Everything will be fine. Lily's concern gave way to a mix of surprise and amusement. You know, you're starting to sound a lot like my son. Had he been here, I would expected him to say something like that. She had known Daphne since before she started at Hogwarts and could see how much the girl had changed over the past year. Daphne's once stoic demeanor had softened, her loyalty to Harry evident in every word she spoke. Daphne pulled her hood lower to hide her embarrassment. I do not. Wait. Something's happening. James shot to his feet, pointing at the lake. The water's surface began to stir, the current becoming violent. Waves lapped against the shore with increasing intensity, sending scattered droplets into the air. Are they coming out? Lily perked up. No, Luna said softly. Her voice was almost drowned out by the rising uproar among the spectators, but it was loud enough for the ones next to her to hear, and the certainty in her tone made the others pause and turn to look at her. Luna, what are you saying? Lily asked, confused. The commentator was equally puzzled, expecting one of the champions to resurface. However, the water abruptly returned to its previous calm, leaving the audience in a hushed, uneasy silence. He's gone, and Lyra too, Luna murmured, her gaze fixed on the lake's surface. Nothing stirred below. Then, what we saw was a magical reaction, and a strong one at that, Daphne concluded. Something happened down there. What could have happened? Were they attacked by the merfolk or something? Neville, unaware of the looming danger, offered a naive suggestion. His brow furrowed as he tried to recall anything Harry might have hinted at before the task began. Daphne stood and approached Luna. Are you sure he's gone from the lake? Luna nodded. Harry is very bright. I can always see him when he's close. But he's gone. Daphne, did he? James trailed off, wanting to ask if she knew this would happen, but reluctant to discuss it openly in such a public setting. He expected something to happen, Daphne said, but we didn't know exactly what it would be. Still, knowing him, he's prepared for anything they might throw at him. James nodded. That's true. A portkey, Lily muttered, piecing it together. The phenomenon they witnessed made the most sense if a portkey had been involved. Her mind raced back to other instances where similar tactics had been used, her stomach churning at the implications. A trap meant for... Oh, Neville finally understood. That would explain it. Daphne admitted. A powerful magical reaction followed by Harry and Lyra's disappearance pointed to teleportation. Her mind immediately began calculating possible destinations, weighing the risks. Lily turned to Neville, recalling something her son had told her about his original 4th year, and what had happened during the last task. "He's trying to capture the boy who lived, isn't he?" Her words were a hushed whisper, but those nearby heard her. "Then someone's about to get a surprise," Daphne said dryly. Her confidence in Harry was absolute. Lily and James exchanged knowing looks. If Voldemort's followers were attempting to abduct their son, mistaking Neville for him, they were in for a rude awakening. Luna suddenly looked skyward, her expression distant yet focused. "Pudding. What is it?" her father Zeno asked gently. He leaned closer, his eccentric demeanor momentarily replaced with genuine concern. "Am I seeing things again?" Luna murmured. "There's a big black dot up there." "A black dot?" James began to look up when a commotion broke out at the lake. At the central floating station where the champions had initially jumped in, something was clearly amiss. From their vantage point they could see McGonagall yelling urgently at the other judges and organizers. Her gestures were sharp and panicked, her wand drawn as she pointed toward the castle. "Minerva looks very distressed," Lily observed. Her hands gripped the railing in front of her, knuckles whitening as her anxiety mounted. "She likely felt the castle wards being breached," Daphne said. This is what she had been waiting for. Now everyone could see it, a large black dot rapidly growing larger, indicating something massive was approaching. The air around them grew colder, an unnatural chill that seemed to seep into their bones. "What is that?" Lily asked, alarmed. The unease she'd felt earlier now bloomed into full-blown dread. James's eyes widened in recognition. "Oh no." Daphne's expression sharpened. "Get ready. It's begun." Things quickly turned from confusion to chaos when a large group of black-robed individuals descended toward the lake on broomsticks. Their attire made them easy to identify for anyone familiar with the last war. "Death Eaters," Professor Flitwick yelled. "Death Eaters inside Hogwarts." What is the meaning of this?" Headmistress Maxime exclaimed, her voice rising above the growing panic. "Where did those men came from?" "Protect the students," McGonagall commanded, her wand already in hand. "Death Eaters, you say?" Mr. Crouch trembled at the mere mention of the name. "No, that can't be, the minister assured me," he muttered, his face pale. Snape ignored the panic around him. These people were already terrified, and they had only seen the tip of the iceberg. His eyes moved to the skies, where the Dark Lord was about to make his grand entrance. The 24 dark wizards did not immediately attack. They simply circled the lake on their brooms like vultures waiting, but it soon became evident to everyone that this was only the beginning. A large number of shadowy figures began to emerge from inside the castle, marching toward the lake at a brisk pace. "James," Lily whispered. "I know. Stay quiet," he warned her. Now was not the time to draw attention to themselves. The opportunity to act would come later. A dark army marched along the shore of the Black Lake, advancing toward the stands. Screams erupted from the crowd as people realized the nature of the approaching creatures. "Undead," someone cried. "Trolls," another voice shouted. It was a scene straight out of a nightmare. At the front of the army, hundreds of sword-wielding skeletons moved in unnatural, jerky motions. 2 glowing red dots burned like fire within their hollow eye sockets. Behind them lumbered dozens of enraged trolls, bound by thick chains that their handlers struggled to control. Further back, dozens of vampires strode leisurely, their faces twisted into delighted smirks at the thought of the feast awaiting them. And towering over them all was 6 giants. Each was massive, even by giant standards, but one stood out from the others, not just for its size, but also because it wore gleaming metallic armor and carried a massive cleaver over its shoulder. "How did all these dark creatures get inside Hogwarts?" Mr. Crouch demanded, "and where is Dumbledore during all of this?" "Yes, what happened to the wards? They should not have been able to breach them so easily," Professor Flintwick said. McGonagall frowned. She wanted to know that as well. Her eyes flicked towards Snape, but she noticed that he wasn't paying any attention to the nightmare army. His gaze remained fixed on the sky. "Severus, what is going on?" she asked, a sinking feeling in her stomach. She was sure that this man knew more than he was letting on. He had been hiding something nefarious. "You know what is happening, don't you?" Without turning around, Snape replied in a cold tone. "You'll see in a moment. He's already here." McGonagall frowned. She was about to grab Snape by the robes and demand an answer when the chaos around her increased tenfold. Now people were screaming and pointing at the sky, the same spot Snape had been watching. When McGonagall looked up, she froze, her heart sinking at the sight. Descending from the skies was a horde of Dementors. Hundreds of them that almost formed a black cloud. If that was not terrifying enough, at the center of this was an impossibly large skeletal dragon, moving its bony wings around and flying toward the sky with its pearly white bones gleaming in the dim light. It seemed so surreal that for a moment McGonagall wondered if she might wake up in her bed, relieved this was all just a nightmare, but she didn't wake up. While the Dementors spread across the sky, the skeletal dragon landed near the shore, opposite where the army had assembled, trapping the spectators in the stands with no way to escape. They were covering land and air, leaving them no way to go. The Death Eaters on broomsticks had begun hovering near the floating platforms, pointing their wands at students and other school personnel. "What do we do?" McGonagall heard Professor Flitwick whisper urgently from beside her. She struggled to process the situation rationally while glancing around. She saw some of the champions being helped out of the water. Crom and Cedric looked bewildered as they handed over their rescued hostages. Clearly unaware of the chaos erupting around them, Fleur was yelling frantically, pointing at the water. McGonagall still saw no sign of Neville or Lyra Potter, but there was nothing she could do about that now. An army of monsters was advancing along the lake, and a gigantic skeletal dragon had landed nearby. What to do? What can we even do? She thought, despair creeping in. The situation seemed hopeless. But then, something occurred to her. Wait, if this was an army, someone must be leading it, and she could think of only one individual who could orchestrate such a terrifying spectacle. Then she saw it. 3 figures were riding on top of the dragon. Standing on its massive skull was one who stood above the rest. McGonagall's blood ran cold. When she saw the figure's bright red eyes, she couldn't see his face from this distance. But the aura surrounding him left no doubt in her mind. This was the Dark Lord. What do we do? Professor Flitwick's earlier question echoed in her mind. Is there even something we can do right now? Greetings, Hogwarts students and citizens of magical Britain. The cold voice was magically enhanced, echoing across the entire area of the lake. Oh no! McGonagall exclaimed with horror in her eyes. Don't do anything stupid, Snape warned. Noticing the look in McGonagall's eyes, he pointed his wand at her for emphasis. Severus, you. McGonagall looked shocked for a moment, but the gravity of the situation quickly sank in. We are completely surrounded. Those masked men are everywhere. Professor Flitwick informed her. There are countless Dementors up here. By Merlin, what is this? Professor Bathsheba Babbling was staring at the dark sky in awe. Did they all come from Azkaban? This is bad. This is really bad. Mr. Crouch began to yell. And where are the auras? They should be doing something. McGonagall looked around herself. The platforms were mostly filled with students who could barely handle themselves during defense class. And those were not going to be of much help during a situation with real danger like this one. There were also 2 auras, but McGonagall did not have too much trust in any new personnel selected by the current Minister of Magic. Her frown deepened as she realized that she couldn't even find the auras among the crowd, making it obvious that they were not willing to take any sort of action. Her suspicions that the men sent by the Ministry of Magic were already compromised were now confirmed. I would like everyone to remain calm and listen to what I have to say. The Dark Lord's voice resonated once more all across the lake. We'll start with an introduction. Some of you may already know who I am, but for those who don't, I am. He dramatically removed the hooded cloak draped over his robes, revealing his true form. I am Lord Voldemort. What is that? Neville yelled, nearly leaping out of his seat. Lily grabbed him, holding him down. Although she had been forewarned about Voldemort's current form, she was still visibly shaken. James felt a chill run down his spine at the sight. This was a monster, unlike any he had faced before. Luna observed the undead in silence while her father held her protectively. Daphne glanced at Voldemort briefly before turning her attention elsewhere. She had a job to do now. Harry was counting on her to create a distraction after all. The rest of the audience, however, could not maintain their composure. Screams erupted as many people bolted in different directions. Those attempting to escape were quickly captured by vampires lurking in the area and dumped in front of a colossal skeletal dragon. The Death Eaters stationed on the water platforms laughed and taunted others to try fleeing. That was rude. I wasn't finished. Voldemort descended from the dragon, glaring at the trembling spectators brought before him. "Monster!" a man cried out, struggling to break free from one of the vampire's iron grip. "A monster, huh?" Voldemort replied, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Is that what I am to you?" No, please let me go," the man begged. "Today at this lake we have some of the most influential wizards and witches of magical Britain present, along with the next generation and even some foreign guests," Voldemort continued, ignoring the terrified man before him. "I chose this precise day for my return so that all of you could bear witness, and to give each and every one of you the opportunity to declare your loyalty to me." Voldemort's gaze locked onto the man in front of him. "Except for you." With a wave of his hand, a yellow substance materialized, splashing over the man's body. A blood-curdling scream filled the air as the man's body began to dissolve. Horror gripped the onlookers, but no one dared to move. "Return the others to their seats and make sure they stay there," Voldemort observed, as the vampires dragged the terrified member audience and waited for a moment before continuing. "No more attempts to escape? That's good. Man, where was I? Ah yes." Voldemort pointed a bony finger at the remnants of the dissolved man. "My tolerance for disrespect is none, but for everyone else I assure you that I am no monster. I can be quite reasonable." While Voldemort continued his speech, Lily and James whispered hurriedly to each other. "Did Harry mention what he planned to do?" James asked. To be fair, their son had only warned them about the imminent attack, not expecting them to do anything other than keep themselves safe. "Wait for him to come back." "It won't be long," Daphne interjected. "He told you more than that, didn't he?" Lily asked, glancing at the blonde girl. Daphne nodded. "I've already activated them. That should buy us some time." "Activated what?" James asked. "Hogwarts defenses," she replied. "And I'll tell you one more thing." Voldemort's voice grew sharper. "Resistance is futile. There is nothing you can possibly do to—" The Dark Lord was abruptly cut off by loud rumbling noises from the other side of the lake. "What is going on?" As he began to ask what was happening, several skeletons from his undead army were flung into the air. "My lord, something is moving beneath the ground," a nearby vampire warned. "Beneath the ground?" Voldemort's sharp eyes scanned the area. Now he could see white objects emerging from the earth, attacking his dark forces. "What is that?" he muttered, shifting his gaze toward the water platforms. With the headmaster dead, the only person who could have activated magical defenses was the deputy headmistress, McGonagall, but she stood right there next to Snape, looking as surprised as everyone else. She couldn't have done anything, or at least that was what he thought. "Golems," one of the Death Eaters shouted. "White golems are emerging from the ground," another added. "Golems," Voldemort repeated thoughtfully. "I can see them now. It appears that we'll face a bit of resistance after all." The light in his crimson eyes glowed even brighter. "I suppose it would have been boring otherwise. I brought my army all the way here after all." There was a hint of amusement in his voice. "How curious. Are those living statues?" a curious voice asked. Two more figures descended from the skeletal dragon and stood beside Voldemort. One was a beautiful black-haired girl wearing a dark dress and holding an ornate umbrella. This was Ankara, the vampire lord, whom Harry had met recently. The one who spoke was next to her. He was an elegant-looking middle-aged man with blonde hair and a well-groomed mustache. Like Ankara, he was also a vampire lord, though far less ancient. Something like that, Lord Sebastian, Voldemort replied carefully. Those two were the only ones he had to treat with tact. They are created by combining several branches of magic. There are many ways to make them. Voldemort had not requested the presence of these two today, but Sebastian had insisted on watching the grand event and he could not refuse a request from them. Also, Lady Ankara was the one whom he had promised the Hogwarts castle after it was conquered, so it's not like it didn't make sense for them to be here. It still made him uneasy and was very much looking forward to the day when he would not have to interact with them again. "Ah yes, I've seen you create those flesh golems using corpses," Sebastian noted with a nod. "Yes, the Inferi," Voldemort clarified. "Aren't they fascinating, Lady Ankara?" Sebastian asked his companion, the things that these wizards can makeshift to compensate for their physical shortcomings. There was a not-so-hidden mockery towards wizard-kind in his tone. "No," she replied curtly, then proceeded to ignore him entirely. "Oh ho! In a bad mood today? Oh I thought acquiring a new castle might make you smile at least." Sebastian teased with a chuckle. Voldemort did not like having these two ancient vampires so close to him, but their presence was a necessary evil. Without their support he wouldn't have achieved what he had so far. It was Lord Sebastian who had created most of the vampires in Voldemort's service, and turned several of his most loyal followers into undead. Lady Ankara, while less involved, held enough influence that her approval had been essential for rallying the Vikers to Voldemort's side. Sacrificing the castle of Hogwarts as payment had been a bitter pill to swallow since it was an important place for him, but in the end it would all be worth it. Once he ruled over all of magical Britain, he could construct a dozen castles more magnificent than Hogwarts. It seems your troops are struggling over there," Sebastian remarked. Voldemort returned his attention to the conflict that had just started. As Sebastian had pointed out, the golems were crushing his skeleton soldiers and overpowering even the trolls. This was no time to appear weak. He was trying to leave a lasting impression on the magical community, and that would not happen if his magnificent army was having so much trouble against some stone constructs. "Would you like me to take care of those magical toys for you?" Sebastian offered with a smile. Though the suggestion seemed sincere, Voldemort could tell he was being mocked for his displayed weakness. "There is no need for your involvement, Lord Sebastian. I will handle this inconvenience myself." No matter what his true intentions were, he could not handle being more indebted to these dangerous individuals. All eyes were on the undead Lich, as he moved toward the battlefield, where his army clashed with the golems. Before Voldemort could reach them, the ground around him trembled, and more golems emerged from below. Counting the ones already engaged in battle, Voldemort estimated there were over 50 constructs, and it seemed like more were still emerging from the ground. Several ones had just appeared next to him, and the moment they surfaced they moved all to attack him. "Humph," the Dark Lord huffed with annoyance. The first golem to take a step closer to him was obliterated by a powerful blasting charm. Voldemort found it irritating that his specialty, death magic, was going to be useless against these constructs. As they weren't living beings, they were unaffected by it. But it wasn't as if he didn't have other weapons at his disposal. A few more blasting charms were enough to reduce the remaining golems to rubble. "It was easier than I thought." Just as Voldemort prepared to advance, he sensed movement behind him. Something tried to grab him. He sidestepped just in time as a white stone hand passed by, brushing against his robes. "What is—" Voldemort turned to see the upper torso of one of the shattered golems crawling toward him. He was certain he had reduced all of them to rubble. There shouldn't have been anything left. Then it happened again. Another broken golem reassembled itself and attempted to attack him. "They regenerate," Voldemort realized. Now he could see it clearly, the fragments of broken golems reassembling themselves, as though they were under the effect of a massive repare charm. A self-repairing golem wasn't entirely unheard of, but these constructs regenerated far faster than anything Voldemort had ever encountered. He also noted that they had some magical resistance on top of that, otherwise his blasting spells would have reduced them to dust instead of big chunks of rock. Did the old man always have these hidden away somewhere? Voldemort wondered aloud with some weariness. An army of such golems could have decimated him and his followers in the previous war. Back then, he only had a handful of Death Eaters with him, and his magic was much weaker. The only plausible conclusion was that either Dumbledore hadn't possessed them, or they could only operate within the grounds of Hogwarts. I see. So this was your last obstacle left behind for me, you old fool. Voldemort's crimson eyes narrowed. I'll show you. The undead dragon shifted from its position, taking flight. How pointless this is, Voldemort bellowed as the dragon descended upon the golems, crushing most of them beneath its bony claws. Their remains were drenched in a viscous, acidic liquid conjured by Voldemort, causing the constructs to dissolve rapidly. Once the golems were neutralized, Voldemort resumed his march. This is nothing but a mild inconvenience to me. Today, I'll destroy the rest of your legacy and take this castle. That thing is insane. It's crushing the golems like they're toys, Lily exclaimed, staring at the skeletal dragon. She had seen firsthand just how powerful those white marble golems were during the werewolf invasion, but now even 100 of them didn't appear to be enough. That's a true monster, like its master, James said, his mind still haunted by the image of the dragon standing over the ruins of the Bones Manor. Shouldn't we try to escape? Neville asked hesitantly. Look around you, Daphne replied. It was then that Neville noticed not everyone in Voldemort's army was distracted by the golems. Several Death Eaters were flying around the audience stands, and a dozen vampires stood nearby ready to intercept anyone who tried to escape or fight back. Oh! Neville's desire to run quickly disappeared. Still, if we just sit here and do nothing, Lily's restlessness was growing. She knew that once Voldemort's army finished dealing with the golems, they'd come for the rest of them next. James, however, knew just how hopeless the situation was. Even if every single member of the audience stood up to fight at the same time, they wouldn't accomplish much. Most of them were students from Hogwarts or the 2 visiting schools. When it came to combat, they likely knew little more than the disarming charm, and under this pressure, many might not even manage that. As for the few adults present, the vast majority of the country's magical population had little experience defending themselves with their wands. That just wasn't how magic was used in their daily lives. Even the weakest of the Death Eaters could make quick work of them, and that wasn't even accounting for the vampires. James shuddered, remembering just how deadly those creatures were. They moved with incredible speed, and some carried cursed daggers. Even a tiny wound from those blades could kill within seconds. There were only a handful of people James could rely on. A few former Aurors who had joined the Order of the Phoenix were present, but they were likely thinking the same thing he was, that any resistance they mounted would be nothing more than a brief distraction. Harry, what were you thinking? James wished his son had shared the specifics of his plan. He could be a lot more relaxed if he knew what he had planned. His eyes moved to Voldemort's army. They were still struggling with the golems, but it wouldn't last much longer now that Voldemort himself had joined the fray. Then his gaze shifted to the 2 figures who had descended from the dragon. They hadn't moved from their spot. James noted that those 2 were traveling with Voldemort, which could only mean their positions within his ranks were significant. That also meant they were likely even more dangerous than the others. Daphne, Lily whispered, can you bring more of those golems? Her voice betrayed her growing concern as their numbers dwindled. There are 101 white marble golems in Hogwarts. 100 are already here. The last one is on its way. There's only one more. Lily's tone grew desperate. What is one more golem going to do? This last one is special, Daphne replied. Special how? Lily asked. A slightly mischievous smile appeared on Daphne's face. You'll see in a moment, it's almost here. As she spoke, the ground began to shake violently. What is happening now? Neville cried. Voldemort himself seemed to wonder the same thing when, all of a sudden, something massive emerged from the ground beneath him. Large amounts of dirt and stone were pushed aside as something else came into view. The first thing they all saw was a colossal white hand grabbing the dragon's equally massive neck and pulling it down. Voldemort was forced to retreat as the ground became unstable. The dragon let out a chilling screech, struggling against the grip of the enormous hand. Slowly but steadily, more of the golem came into view as it emerged from the ground, its grip never loosening on the dragon's neck. When the colossal figure was fully visible, gasps of shock rippled through the crowd. "That's a golem too," James exclaimed. "Whoa, it's kinda big," Luna commented. "Kinda. That thing is as big as the dragon," Neville added. "It's on our side, right?" Lily turned to glare at Daphne, clearly expecting an explanation. "I told you the last golem was special," Daphne stated. "I believe it was originally designed to fight against giant monsters that dared to attack the castle, so it is fitting to be used against that one." That was speculation on Daphne's part. As Harry had mentioned, the foundations where the golems were soared were much older than Hogwarts itself. "Wow. Merlin, what the—" The audience collectively gasped as the colossal golem lifted the dragon with one hand. With its free hand it punched the creature square in the face, sending it tumbling. Where did something like that come from? James wondered aloud. He could believe the smaller golems had been hidden somewhere in the castle, even if he and his friends had spent years exploring and mapping Hogwarts during their school days. But this thing, this massive stone creature, there was no way they could have missed something like that. The golem stood nearly 300 feet tall, a true colossus made of white marble. "Okay, this one might actually make a difference," Lily had to admit. It was a surreal spectacle. Seeing these two gigantic creatures locked in combat, the golem's every step sent tremors through the ground, and each of its punches created shockwaves that rippled across the shore. The skeletal dragon fought back with claws and teeth, but its attacks seemed almost futile against the sheer might of the construct. The shore of the lake, barely wide enough to accommodate them, frequently forced the combatants into the dark waters. The dragon slashed and bit ferociously, but the golem retaliated with relentless punches that cracked its skeletal frame. It didn't take long for the battle to show a clear advantage. Despite the dragon being slightly larger and heavier, the golem's regenerative capabilities ensured it would eventually come out on top. Not wanting to lose his most prized weapon, Voldemort hurled a barrage of deadly spells at the golem, but that much less effect compared to what they did to the smaller ones. Not just because of the size, but its magical resistance seems also to be stronger. "Tusk, to think you had a weapon like this hidden in Hogwarts!" Voldemort's crimson eyes burned with fury. He turned sharply toward his army. The giants were gleefully crushing the smaller golems into rubble. "Gruel!" Voldemort's voice thundered across the battlefield. The largest of the giants, a soaring figure holding a shattered golem in his massive hands, stopped mid-laugh at the sound of his name. "The Lord called," Gruel rumbled. "Yes, I have called," Voldemort snapped, pointing at the colossal golem. "Forget the small ones. I want you to destroy that one." Gruel turned his gaze to the towering construct. The giant king hadn't even noticed it before, too preoccupied with demolishing the smaller ones. Now he was faced with a rare sight, something larger than himself. But rather than intimidation, Gruel felt only excitement. "Destroy it?" "Yes." He barked a command to 5 of his soldiers and began moving toward the colossus. The battlefield went eerily silent as the skeletal dragon let out a deafening roar, its piercing cry shaking the very air. In the next moment, the colossal golem delivered a thunderous punch to the dragon's head. The force of the blow sent the dragon's skull flying, dislodging it entirely from the rest of its body. "Yeah, take that," James cheered, his voice carrying through the stunned silence. The audience erupted into celebration, their fear momentarily replaced by hope. But not everyone was cheering. "No?" Voldemort's enraged scream silenced the joyous crowd. Damn it, he stomped his bony foot on the ground in frustration. His only solace was knowing he could fix the dragon. Eventually, the skull could be retrieved and reattached, but reanimating it and repairing the extensive damage would take significant time and effort. This meant that he could no longer count on it for this battle. This was the first major loss Voldemort had suffered since his return. He barely spared a thought for the Death Eaters or the strangers who had perished. They were replaceable pawns, but the dragon? That was a tool of true value. Gruel and his warriors reached the colossus. Wasting no time, the giant king swung his massive cleaver, slicing into the golem's leg. Chunks of marble and stone flew in all directions. The golem faltered, struggling to regain its balance, and swung a powerful punch at Gruul, who dodged with surprising agility for his massive size. Despite being only a third of the golem's height, Gruul compensated with speed and combat expertise. The other giants joined in, hacking at the golem's legs with their crude but effective weapons. While they couldn't reach higher than its knees, the damage they inflicted was enough to distract the construct, allowing their king to continue his assault. Voldemort observed with satisfaction, muttering curses at the lost dragon, but feeling vindicated by the giants' success. The battle then continued to rage on. While the bulk of Voldemort's army persisted in holding off the smaller golems, the combined efforts of Gruul, his warriors, and Voldemort's corrosive spells designed to stop the Colossus from regenerating had begun to turn the tide in their favor. In the stands, the spectators' hope dwindled once more. Helpless to intervene, they had pinned all their faith on the constructs to save them. Lily glanced at Daphne, who seemed strangely unfazed despite the brutal destruction of the smaller golem, and even the trouble that the colossal one now faced. "Daphne," Lily whispered, watching as the giant king delivered a devastating blow, severing one of the golem's massive arms. Gruul, despite his towering frame, moved with startling precision and agility, his blows deliberate and effective. He was a warrior, through and through. "This isn't looking good," James muttered. If it came down to it, he knew he'd have to create a distraction so that Lily and the others could escape. At least his children weren't here. For that he was thankful. "Daphne," Lily's tone sharpened as she turned to glare at the blonde witch. "If you know something we don't, now would be a good time to share." Because a loud, sickening crack interrupted her. "The golem," James muttered, his face falling as the giant shattered its legs, forcing it to collapse to the ground. Once it was down, the giants began smashing it to pieces with savage glee. Laughter erupted from Voldemort and his Death Eaters as they reveled in the sight of the mighty construct's destruction. "Don't worry about that." Lily turned toward Daphne, startled by her calm tone. Daphne didn't even glance at the broken golem. Instead, she stared at something on her wrist, her expression serene. "There's no need to distract them anymore," she said cryptically. Before Lily could press her further, Luna abruptly stood from her seat. "He's here." Luna's voice was soft, but it carried a weight that sent a shiver through everyone who heard it. In the distance, two vampire lords stood observing the chaos with disinterest. Sebastian turned toward his companion, his stoic demeanor cracking when he noticed her trembling. It was an unfamiliar sight. Lady Ankara was shaking. "Master," she whispered, so faintly it was almost inaudible. Sebastian's sharp ears caught the word, and his eyes narrowed. Comment. "Lady Ankara, what did you just say?" His voice was low, tinged with unease. He couldn't ignore the implication of that single chilling word when it came from the lips of the oldest and most powerful vampire he knew. Moments before the attack, unknown location. "Show yourself, you little shit," Bellatrix roared into the darkness. Even with her enhanced eyesight, she could not pierce through the oppressive void that surrounded her. She would never admit it, but this strange place made her uneasy. "Where are we?" Wormtail stammered, his voice trembling with fear. "It's too dark," Goyle shouted, stumbling forward. "Can't see my feet," Crabbe added, though the reason he couldn't see them had less to do with the darkness and more with his massive belly. Without warning, a barrage of spells came flying at the group. "Chesk!" Bellatrix moved with impossible speed, evading every curse aimed her way. However, her companions weren't so fortunate. Wormtail let out a cry of pain as a bone-breaker curse shattered his right leg. Goyle barely escaped with a shallow cut from a cutting charm. Off, that was Clab. His sentence was cut short by the wet splatter of blood. An exploding curse impacted Crabbe's head, reducing it to a gruesome mess. Goyle stared in horror as his friend's headless body collapsed. His scream stuck in his throat, replaced by a strangled gasp. "Damn it!" Bellatrix snarled, whirling toward the direction of the attack. She raised her wand and cast a powerful spell. Fiendfire! From her wand erupted a flaming crow, its crimson body radiating a malevolent heat. Bellatrix gritted her teeth. This was her third attempt casting the spell, and it drained her reserves considerably. If her magic became too depleted, she'd have no choice but to rely on hand-to-hand combat, a dangerous gamble against an unseen opponent. They watched the fiery crow soar into the distance, its glow barely illuminating the oppressive darkness. Much to their shock, it vanished completely, swallowed whole by the abyss. For the first time in decades, Bellatrix felt something foreign and unwelcome: fear. That unyielding void made her feel vulnerable and exposed in a way she hadn't been since childhood. "What the... Arg!" Wormtail whimpered, his agony a constant reminder of his shattered leg. "That won't work," came a calm voice echoing ominously. Bellatrix froze. Her eyes darted wildly, but she couldn't pinpoint the source. "Ah!" Wormtail's scream broke the tension. Blood sprayed across his face, as Goyle's head exploded just like Crab's. Wormtail trembled, frozen in horror, while Bellatrix's breath hitched. She hadn't heard or sensed a spell. If it had been aimed at her, she'd be dead already. "Damn it, show yourself. I'll rip you to pieces," she screamed, pouring every ounce of her anger into the threat. "No need for that," Harry said, stepping out from the shadows. Wormtail recoiled, his bloodied hands trembling as he took in Harry's face. James?" Wormtail's eyes widened in disbelief. "This isn't what it looks like. They forced me to bring them here. I am not James." "I think I already said that," Harry replied coldly. "Not James." Wormtail's gaze flickered to Harry's vibrant green eyes. "Those eyes, you're Harry, aren't you?" Desperation bled into his voice. "I'm Peter. I saw you when you were a baby. You probably don't remember me, but I was a good friend of your family." Harry's expression darkened, his disdain evident. "You have to believe me, Harry, they made me do this. I would never harm your family." Wormtail's pleading grew more frantic. "You really think I'll let you go because you begged?" Harry's tone was colder than ice. Wormtail's face twisted into a sneer, abandoning his act. "No, I know you wouldn't. You're a righteous bastard like your father. I was just trying to distract you." Bellatrix lunged from behind, a cursed dagger in hand. "Got you," she hissed, aiming for Harry's face. With unnatural speed, Harry's hand shot up, catching her arm mid-strike. The force of her momentum stopped with a sickening snap. The dagger's tip hovered less than an inch from his cheek, but no matter how hard Bellatrix pushed, she couldn't drive it closer. "Getting this close to me was definitely the wrong choice," Harry said, his voice devoid of emotion. Bellatrix's arm began to tremble. Pain shot through her limb as she felt her flesh decaying under his grip. Her hand disintegrated into dust, and the cursed dagger clattered to the ground. Stumbling backward, she glanced down in horror as her feet began to vanish as well. Whatever magic Harry had unleashed was consuming her whole. "Bella?" Wormtail screamed. "My lord." Bellatrix's last words came as her body dissolved into nothingness. "A less painful death than she deserved," Harry muttered, turning to Wormtail. Wormtail had taken advantage of the distraction, pulling his wand and aiming it shakily at Harry. "Avada Kedavra!" he screamed. The sickly green light of the killing curse struck Harry square in the chest and dissipated harmlessly. Wormtail's jaw dropped. "I'm not explaining to you why that didn't work." Harry noted the look of confusion on the man's face. He then drew a line with his finger. "Divulsa." A flash of purple light hit Wormtail stud his shoulder, severing his wand arm in its entirety. The man let out a blood-curdling scream, but Harry felt no satisfaction with just this. "I never took joy in torturing my enemies," Harry said, his voice eerily calm. "But for you I would have made an exception." He paused, his expression hardening. "You are the worst of them all." Wormtail's pleas devolved into incoherent cries as Harry's spell, a corrosive curse, began consuming him from the inside out. Harry watched for a moment, then turned away. Harry would have stayed there and watched it happen, as it would take him several minutes to die, but he had already felt the marble golems being activated by Daphne. This meant that the situation at Hogwarts was not good, and he had to return. Still hearing Wormtail's screams, Harry abandoned this pocket dimension and returned to the real world. Reborn. Harry found himself within the protective wards of his family's property. "Harry," Lyra called, rushing to his side. Where did you go? You disappeared all of a sudden. Had to take care of the intruders, Harry replied. Lyra's eyes scanned the area. Where are they? Gone, Harry said curtly. Stay here. I have to go back to Hogwarts, he added. Wait, why can't I go back with you? Lyra asked, confused. I want to see what's going on at the school too. Stay here, Harry said firmly, raising his staff. The runes along its surface glowed brightly as he channeled his magic. Voldemort's blood wards tried to bar him from returning to Hogwarts, but Harry poured more power into his spell. That won't stop me, he muttered, and with a final surge of magic, he vanished. Lyra stood alone, staring at the spot where her brother had been. He just left me here, she muttered in disbelief. She huffed in frustration before turning back toward the house. Harry, what the hell? Hogwarts, Black Lake Shore. Voldemort was the first to notice the change in the air. He glanced up and saw the Dementors moving in erratic patterns, emitting loud, unsettling cries. Then, he felt the anti-apparition blood wards stir, and he immediately knew what this meant. He became alarmed. Someone is trying to break out. He couldn't even finish the sentence to warn his followers. It all happened in an instant. The metallic spire being used as a catalyst to empower the blood wards was brutality shattered. This was followed by a powerful shockwave emanating from the shore of the lake, drawing everyone's attention. A mysterious figure stood there now, wrapped in impossibly black robes that obscured their features. Dumbledore! Voldemort yelled at the top of his lungs. 1,000 thoughts raced through his mind. As far as he knew, Dumbledore was the only wizard capable of breaching his blood wards, but that would mean Snape had betrayed him. As his non-existent blood began to boil with anger, the hood covering the person's face was pulled back. Voldemort instantly realized this individual looked nothing like Dumbledore. Harry scanned the battlefield with his bright green eyes before landing on Voldemort, who stared back at him with an expression of what he assumed was one of surprise. It was hard to tell since the man had no skin. I am not Dumbledore, I'm afraid you're not that lucky today, Harry said before shifting his attention elsewhere. Who are you then? Voldemort demanded. Harry's face looked vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. Harry tapped his staff on the ground. First things first, let's secure this place. Every member of the audience noticed the immediate change in the atmosphere. The oppressive sensation of Voldemort's blood wards was replaced by a warm and gentle aura. All around the stands at the shore where Harry's parents were seated, as well as on the floating platforms where the teachers and champions stood, a protective layer began to form. This is a Protego charm. Professor McGonagall observed the phenomenon surrounding them. Of this size, impossible. That would require a tremendous amount of magic, Professor Flitwick added. Look closely. It's not just a charm, there are runes embedded in it, noted Professor Bafchida, babbling, who taught ancient runes and found the display fascinating. Will this thing be able to protect us from those monsters? Madame Maxime asked. McGonagall turned to look at Snape. Even if they were protected, they still had a potential traitor in their midst. Shit, what do we do? Shut up, you idiot. Nearby, two men began arguing loudly. McGonagall was momentarily distracted by their argument and lost track of Snape. When she spotted him again, he was pointing his wand directly at her. Avada Kedavra! Snape conjured the killing curse. No. McGonagall didn't have time to defend herself. A simple protective charm would not stop such a deadly spell. She saw the green light appear and streak toward her, only for it to hit one of the arguing men behind her. What? She couldn't comprehend what had just happened. The people next to her screamed in panic. The surviving man had his wand ready. Bloody hell, Snape, you traitor! But Snape was faster. Before the man could utter a single sound, he was hit with a disarming spell. Snape followed it with something deadlier. Sectum Sempra. The man collapsed as his body was sliced open, deep wounds bleeding profusely. Snape, what are you doing? Professor Flitwick yelled. Those two are auras. That's right, McGonagall gasped. She realized these men were indeed the auras sent by the Ministry to bolster event security. She had almost forgotten about them. Those are no auras, they're Death Eaters. They were about to kill you all, Snape huffed, keeping his eye on the dying man. Death Eaters. But, Flitwick muttered, his voice trailing off. Snape knelt next to the man struck by the killing curse and tore the fabric from his right arm, revealing Voldemort's dark mark. It's true then. McGonagall was about to ask why he had killed them, but the motive was obvious. Snape was a traitor, but not to their side. Snape glared at her. My allegiance has always been the same. I'm sorry, Severus. McGonagall felt a pang of guilt for doubting him. Dumbledore had always trusted this person, but she could never bring herself to do the same. We should be fine now, the others shouldn't be able to get in here, Snape said, though uncertainty lingered in his tone. I've done my part, the rest is up to you, Potter. Hey, that's Harry. Cedric pointed toward the figure, diverting the audience's attention away from the now dead Death Eaters. It's true, that's Harry Potter, Victor Krum confirmed. Is he the one who cast this protection? That boy. Impossible, Madame Maxime said. This must be Dumbledore's work. But where is he? Severus, is that right? Is Dumbledore back at Hogwarts? I'm sure you know something about this. McGonagall asked, her gaze fixed on Snape. The headmaster is not here. This is Potter's doing. He is not what you think, Snape said, his eyes fixed on the black-robed figure in the distance. What do you mean by that? Professor Flitwick asked. Snape glanced back at them for a moment. I believe we're all about to see something impressive, or at least he hoped. Otherwise, they were all going to have some very painful deaths.